I had the privilege of meeting Randy Bruner at our HMNS Sugarland location. Randy is an expert in all things bourbon, everything from the chemistry to the distilling process, and of course, the truly fascinating history of this popular spirit. I'm your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger, and this is the HMNS Beyond Bones podcast presented by the Houston Museum of Natural Science. Now, sit back and relax in your finest leather chair, and let's make a toast to a delightful conversation discussing the science and history of bourbon. I'm here with Randy Bruner. He is a bourbon expert. Would that be safe to say?
Yes.
Sir? And we're going to learn a bit about bourbon today. So, Randy, what can you tell us? Where does the process begin? I guess that's a good place to start.
Well, we're going to talk about the history too a bit, because the history is linked together with the science. Mm-hmm. The reason that all 95% of the bourbon's made in Kentucky, first of all, bourbon has to be made in the United States. That's the requirement. But 95% of it's made in Kentucky. And why Kentucky? Well, it relates to the climate, it relates to the geology. In fact, the limestone, and this is a piece of limestone, the limestone that underlays all of central Kentucky helps buffer the water. And the water there is low in iron content, which is really bad for distilling. It also adds calcium to the water, which is very beneficial to the yeast that you're using to convert the sugars into alcohol. So all of those chemistry things relate to this. And they got there by just luck or chance or however they wanted to get there.
Even geology.
Even the geology is, the geology is very important actually. And if you look at the distilleries in Kentucky, they're all centered around the middle part of the state where the limestones are in the subsurface there, and are closer to the surface anyway. So they get all their water from there, and that's really, really important. The climate is important because you need all four seasons. The aging process requires the heating and cooling of the barrels. Mm-hmm. So the weather is important too. Back in the day when it first started, Kentucky was a very good place to grow corn. And since bourbon has to be 51% corn, that was a great lead in to bringing people there to make bourbon whiskey versus rye whiskey, which is what was mostly made in the Northeast, because rye grows better there than corn. So you had the product. Also, the state of Kentucky, when it was first formed in 1792, was required to pay Virginia for being separated from Virginia, and the payment was in corn. Wow. And the problem with transporting corn at that time was it was a slow process. Mm-hmm. So the easiest way to send the corn was to first convert it into alcohol and then ship it that way. So that's another reason it kind of started the whole bourbon thing going on there. So it was on some major rivers, the river system there. There's a lot of things that kind of came together to make that the place to make bourbon whiskey.
I find that very just personally funny. Mm-hmm. That they said, we want corn. Part of this trade is that we want corn. And then Kentucky said, well, you accept it in the form of alcohol. And Virginia said, sure thing, we'll accept it in the form of alcohol.
Absolutely.
So speaking of bourbon and whiskey, what is the technical difference between bourbon and whiskey?
Okay, bourbon, as they say, all bourbon is whiskey, but not all whiskey is bourbon. Bourbon has a set of rules that were required by the government to be called bourbon. It has to be produced at no higher than 160 proof. It has to be made 51% corn, at least. Most of them are 60 or 70%, but at least 51%. It can't go into the barrel higher than 125 proof. And it has to be put into a charred oak container. Nowadays we use barrels. It doesn't have to be a barrel, but that's what people use as barrels. And so to meet all those, it has to meet all those rules, and then it has to be bottled at higher than at least 80 proof.
To be considered bourbon.
To be considered bourbon. Now, you can make whiskey. They make whiskey in other parts of the country, different ways. They make rye whiskeys, they make wheat whiskeys, but whiskey basically has to be made from grain. Mm-hmm. So if you make a distilled product from, say, grapes, you get cognac or port or something. You don't get a whiskey. So it has to be made with grains, and we have corn. Mm-hmm. The other two grains that are commonly used, they're called flavor grains, are wheat. Although most of them use rye. Rye is the number one as far as grains go. Most people use rye as the flavor grain. It gives it a little bit of spicy flavor, adds a little bit of extra flavor to it. So a lot of people like rye whiskeys. Wheat whiskeys like Maker's Mark. There are some others are very uses this rental wheat, gives it a much more mellow flavor, I would say. It's like the difference between rye bread and wheat bread, right?
Yeah,
some people like rye bread, some people like wheat bread. So that's the difference. That's a easy way to think of it.
It's an excellent way.
Then the fourth grain that's added to all of them is malted barley. And when they malt the grain, what they do is they wet it, they cause it to sprout, and then they stop that process and dry it. And the reason they do that, and the reason it's added in, is because there's an enzyme. We're going to the biochemistry here, but there's an enzyme called amylase, which is created by plants to convert the starches in their seeds into sugars that the plant can use to grow. And so that's what we're trying to do, is turn the starches into sugars so the yeast can eat them and create alcohol. So it's the same process. So that's why that's added. Really doesn't add much to the flavor. Now, this is the grain that is used to make scotch. That's 100% malted barley. And so you get a much more mild flavor. Corn tends to give it a little more of a punch, a little more of a sweeter, more striking flavor, I should say, than scotch.
Right.
In my opinion.
So, generally speaking, because I am sure that it varies wildly, but how long does it take to go from raw ingredients to in the bottle to drink?
Okay, the distillation process is pretty fast. The longest part of it is the fermentation. And so what they do is they grind these grains up. Again, they're trying to get those starches to be released. They cook them. Again, that's to start breaking down the starches. Then they put them in a big giant vat. They used to be made out of cypress wood. Most of them are made out of stainless steel now. And they put the yeast in there. And then the yeast converts the sugars to alcohol and CO2 and heat. They warm up. And so that process is the longest part of it. It takes about 5 days, 3 to 5 days, depending on what distillery you're going to. Then they run it through a still to separate out the alcohol. The ethyl alcohol that we're after vaporizes at about 173 degrees. The other alcohols and things that are in there vaporize at different temperatures, like methanol is about 145 degrees, thankfully, because you want to get that out. That's the bad kind of alcohol. So that process is in a big column still, looks like a refinery, which is basically the same process. You put steam in the bottom and the mash in the top, and they meet in the middle, and there's copper plates in there that help sort of diffuse it as it goes and keeps it moving up and down so that it moves as much alcohol as possible. They run it through the column still, then they'll usually run it through another still called a pot still, a doubler they call it. And that's to increase the alcohol even more, to get it up to that 150, 160 proof that they're trying to get out of that. So that part takes hours. That's a fairly quick process. And what you end up with something that looks like this. And most people, this is what at Maker's Mark, they call it white dog. It's some people call it moonshine. Moonshine is basically just alcohol having a tax paid on it. But this is a clear product. It comes out like this. And how it ends up being this color, when it comes out of the barrel, that's where all the color comes from the barrel.
I was going to ask where the color of
the color comes from the barrel, because they char the inside of the barrel. That charring process, it causes a lot of the sugars in the wood to be caramelized, and that alcohol then is solvent, goes in and out of the wood as it heats and cools, and removes that color and all that flavoring and brings it into the end product.
This is slightly on subject but off subject. Other liquors, tequila and whatnot. You have the clear tequila, you have the brown tequila. Is that a similar? Is it
Probably.
get its color from a similar?
If it's colored, it's probably because they aged it in a barrel for some period of time. And a lot of the Scotch and some of the aged tequilas and things like that use bourbon barrels. The bourbon barrel can only be used once to be bourbon. It can only be used once. And so once it's used, then other people use it. And a lot of them go to Scotland for Scotch.
Interesting.
And so they actually disassemble the barrels, put them on a ship, send them over there, reassemble them, and use them for Scotch.
Are they down to the detail of including the same the bands, the metal bands?
It has to all stay the same because
Okay.
the staves, these wooden pieces that form the barrel, they fit together very precisely.
Oh, yes.
And when they make
Yeah.
the barrel, and so they have to use the same staves or it wouldn't fit together. It would leak, and you don't want it to leak.
That makes total sense. You want to use the bands that held for that specific barrel because wood's different.
The bands are not as important as the staves themselves.
Right.
But yeah, probably using the same doesn't hurt.
Minimize leaking, make sure the
You
seals
just got
are
to make
probably
sure
better.
that they're the same barrel is reconstructed so that you can put it back together and it'll work for whatever product you're going to put in it.
Interesting. And I had another question that came to mind. It's a kind of chemistry and business related. You mentioned ethanol. You're trying to get the ethanol out of there. Does the production of bourbon whiskey create enough ethanol that they contain the ethanol and sell it to, you go to the gas pump?
No.
10% ethanol.
I mean, that's how they make ethanol from corn
Right.
that they used to put in as a fuel additive.
Right.
But no, the amount that they're producing is strictly for the bottles, for the barrels that they're using. They don't make commercial grade ethanol. They're making, because then you want to distill it to a higher proof.
Right.
You want to get it up as high, probably pretty much higher. This is, like I say, bourbon's got to stop at 160.
Right.
And then when it goes in the barrel, only thing they can add to it is water. And they add distilled water, basically, to bring it down to that 125 proof. To put it in the barrel. Now, Maker's Mark in particular doesn't go that high. They put theirs in the barrel at about 110 proof. Wow. And the reason they might do that is because the alcohol is a solvent, as I said. The stronger it is, the more it's going to dissolve. And there are some things in the wood that you're not so excited about getting.
Right.
And that's why they age the barrels for a long period of time, is because there's a very complicated series of between the air, the water, the alcohol, the wood. There's about 300 compounds in bourbon, and those 300 compounds are all, working around inside the barrel and changing and combining, and it really affects the flavor for it to be in there that long. It needs to be in there for that period of time for those things to all take place. If you do it too quickly, it can be kind of harsh, and so you'll get on the bottle it'll actually say. In this case, it's Kentucky, but Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey. There's another set of rules for that. To say straight bourbon whiskey, you have to age it for at least 2 years. If you age it less than 4 years, you have to put on the bottle how long it was aged. If it's more than 4, you don't have to.
True.
Now, Maker's Mark and some of these others tend to age their bourbon about 6 to 7 years. And that seems to be kind of a sweet spot for when you're getting enough aging, but commercially, you're not keeping the barrel for too long because you lose, the barrels actually lose alcohol. Alcohol and water. They use water preferentially because water molecules are smaller than alcohol molecules. And so you lose water, but you do also lose alcohol. And if you go in one of the rick houses where they store the barrels, you'll smell it because it's coming out when it's a hot day. So during the course of aging, the first year they lose about 6%. The next year after that, they'll use about 3% a year. So the longer they age it, the less there is in the barrel. Yeah. So if you get like this Elijah Craig 18 year, by its aging of 18 years, it will be less than half full.
Now, is there, with wine, sometimes there's bottles that cost tens, thousands, even millions of dollars. You found a bottle of wine from 1830, it's untouched, it's all dusty and nice. So here's, as somebody who's not a connoisseur, I'm just a layperson with wines and with bourbons, to know the difference, the subtle differences between each brand, between each pour. Even I'm sure that there are bourbon aficionados that can tell which bourbon from which barrel from which batch this came. They probably get it down to that. Is there a truth to finding a 60, 70, 80, or 100-year-old aged bourbon tasting better, like just unequivocally better than an 18-year bourbon?
Everybody has a different palate, and so your view, there are people in the community, the bourbon community, who really, really search for those pre-prohibition bottles. And so to them, those are much better. Now, once it goes in here and it's sealed, it doesn't change. So you can buy a bottle that's 100 years old and one that's 5 years old, and they're basically the same in the bottle. They don't change.
Right.
So it's what went into making that bourbon at the time. What yeast did they use? What grains did they use? There's a big thing about not using GMO, grains.
Right. Yeah, genetically modified.
Because they don't want to change how the flavors are. So that's a big thing. You'll see that on bottles a lot of times.
So bourbon's organic.
Yes, it is organic. Yes, it is. Actually, it's no carbohydrates and it's got a few calories, but but other than that, but yeah, it's so they do that because they think those bottles taste better, but they're hard to find and they're expensive, and the ones I've tasted that are pre-prohibition, the 1940s, I mean, sorry, the 1915, 1918, whatever, I can't taste a huge difference. I mean, and maybe my palate's just not sophisticated enough to do that. But and I'm older. And when you go to places, and there are things you lose when you get older. One of them is your tastes aren't quite as acute.
Sure.
And so when you go into a distillery, the people that are tasting the products to make sure that they're good and what they're looking for in their taste profile are mostly young, and they're mostly women, because women seem to have a better sense of subtle flavors. They're better at picking those things out than
that is
a lot of the men are. And so it's an interesting observation. But it's I think because of that, I may not be picking up some of the subtle things that those people are.
Right.
And you see people reviews of bourbons, and they talk about tasting things, really odd things. Tobacco, leather, and I'm thinking you didn't really go chew on a leather belt. You're not. You're not. Have you ever eaten tobacco? I mean, I grew up on a tobacco farm. I know what it tastes like, but most people haven't done that. So I think what they're talking about more is the smell, because your smell and taste are very closely related. And I think a lot of people, they're picking up something that they smell that they're picking up in the flavor. And there's a lot of different flavors in bourbon. You can get a lot of different things. There are different compounds in the process that add different flavors. And actually some of them are commercially used to make flavors in other products. Right. So there are things that taste like banana, for instance. And I had I tasted some bourbon one time, and it was just really strongly banana. Wow. And so I knew that compound was a lot of that in that particular bourbon. Right. So it's they can manipulate, and it's a bit of an art, along with the science of manipulating all these different compounds. They call them congeners, and those congeners in the bourbon, they try to affect those in the way to get a product that they like. Now, the other thing they do is, like Maker's Mark, when they bottle it, they combine hundreds and hundreds of barrels. They don't go for one barrel at a time. Interesting. And because each barrel can taste a little bit different. Right. And so they combine them to get a very consistent flavor. Interesting. Because when you buy a bottle of Maker's Mark, you want to taste like Maker's Mark, what you thought. And so they try to keep that consistent. Now, a big trend now is single barrels, where you buy it comes from one barrel. And something like Blanton's. Blanton's is real popular. It's a single barrel made by Buffalo Trace. That came from one barrel. And what that does is it provides some variability. I mean, you can get three different bottles of, it'll say generally the same, but it may taste a little bit different. And so that's real popular right now. Barrel strength, where they don't dilute it when it comes out of the barrel and proof it down to whatever they sell it at. Those are real popular too.
You mentioned earlier that there are upwards of 300 different chemicals and ingredients working together in a bourbon barrel. To me, it instantly, I'm somebody who draws parallels in my mind. It's like a 300-piece symphony.
Yes.
And if you change, so you might have a row of 10 flutists, and if you change one of those flutists' parts, it will be very subtle, but I'm sure an expert would be able to pick out, out of these 10 flutes in this 300-piece symphony, this one's a little different. And that little tweak can make that their favorite or their preferred.
It can, and the thing is if you change this one, it's probably going to affect several others besides that one. And that process actually starts during the distillation process, because what compounds you allow to be carried over into the distillate when you end up with it, because they don't just pull out the ethanol.
Right.
There are compounds on either side of that range, some of which are add to the flavor. Methanol, for instance, methanol is very sweet. That's why people will drink. Small children sometimes can get into methanol products and drink them because they're actually very sweet. And so there might be a little bit of that in there. There might be a little bit of the compounds that are come out later on in the process of heating it up. And all of those things go into it, and how you pick and choose which parts of those you put in can affect the flavor as well. And so it's a fairly complicated process, and a lot of trial and error goes into it, and a lot of that's why these people that have been doing it for 100 years, their products tend to be pretty consistent. But sometimes these real small guys, you can get some variability in what they come up with because they're still tweaking their process. It's a fairly simple process, but there's a lot of moving parts in it.
Right. So what would be the equivalent? Here's another thing that I was thinking. What would be the equivalent of a wine sommelier? What would that be on the bourbon side?
It's the same thing.
Sommelier?
Yes, they call them that. There are people that are real experts in the tasting, and a lot of times they also work as blenders. So there are blended bourbons. You can make a bourbon that you can add products together as long as they're both bourbon.
Right.
And so there are people and still call it bourbon.
Not jungle juice.
So there are people that are really expert at tasting those flavor differences and actually blending them together. For instance, like Japanese whiskeys are basically patterned after Scotch, because that's where they went to learn to make whiskey, was in Scotland. But they are big into blends. And so they have some people that are really serious blenders. That's what they do as a job. Since Maker's Mark and Jim Beam are both owned by Suntory, which is a Japanese company, Jim Beam has done some collaborative things with them, and they've made some blended whiskeys, one called Legion, where they brought the Japanese blender over to the U.S., and he worked with the master distiller in the U.S., and they came up with a product that was a blended bourbon.
Interesting.
And so sometimes it's just blending different barrels from different places in this rickhouse, because the top of the rickhouse gets very hot. Those barrels age faster. They get a higher proof. The ones in the bottom age. So like this 18-year, that was probably in the bottom rick of a stone rickhouse, not a metal one like a lot of them are. You can manipulate that process so that you still have some product left. Because if you try to do 18 years in the top of that, the heat up there would evaporate everything. You'd have an empty barrel by the time you're finished. So that whole process of, this barrel tastes a little bit different. There are sweet spots in those rick houses that they know about, and a lot of times they'll pull special products out of there and sell them as special products. They cost more. So there are people that are really picky. You're saying about only like in a certain vintage or whatever. There are people that will actually try to get a certain row in the rick house, a certain rick house and a certain place in that rick house. I think sometimes it's really hard to believe that you can get that much variability in flavor. I mean, from top to bottom, but in the middle, I don't know. But Maker's Mark is the only company that I know of that actually rotates their barrels. And that's why their barrel proof products tend to be about the same as what their entry proofs are, because when you put it at the top, it evaporates. When you put it at the bottom, because the humidity in Kentucky is fairly high, it actually can absorb water. And so the proof goes back down. And so you end up with a product that's right about where it was when it started.
Wow. And I've noticed on bottles that the unflavored whiskeys, unflavored bourbons say 40% alcohol by volume. And then the flavored ones, like cinnamon flavor, just for example, say 35%. Why is that?
Well, because they added something to it, right? And they can't, and people that drink flavored whiskeys are probably going to shy away from high proof, because the higher proof products, if you're not somebody that drinks bourbon on a regular basis, those high proofs can be sort of harsh. You kind of have to build up the ability to have those without. the other thing is they sometimes drink them pretty fast.
Yeah.
You know, when you're drinking a higher proof or any bourbon product, really, the saying is you should drink it the way it's made. It should be drunk slowly, right?
Deliberately.
You should drink it, you know, sipping, because if you drink it straight with no ice or water or whatever, that's the way, you know, a lot of people drink it, and that's the way I like it. But I like it that way because I like the different flavors. I like to get the flavor of the bourbon out. I don't want it diluted. I don't want it, you know, masked by another product. So, but if you're not a person that drinks a lot of bourbon, you know, you may say, well, I like Fireball, cinnamon flavor, whatever, but you're not going to want it at 115 proof. You're going to want it at a lower proof so you can drink more of it, whatever. But it's, but that adding things to it, once you start adding things to it, the proof's going to go down, and I think they intentionally take it down.
Right. I was leaning towards that direction. Well, this is flavored, so it might be appealing to drinking a lot of it, and maybe they're going to shave a couple off the top.
They make flavored, it'll say maple flavored bourbon. Once you add that stuff, it's no longer bourbon. Okay.
Interesting.
But the way they get around that on the label is they basically say maple flavored bourbon. So it was bourbon at one point. We added maple flavoring to it. You can actually do that with just the barrels. I've had bourbon that was aged in maple wood barrels after it had been aged in the oak, and it really tastes like something you should put on your pancakes. It's, it's like syrup. And there's other different ones. Right now, one that's really popular is called Amberana, and it's a wood. It's actually an oak wood, but it comes from Brazil. And when you secondarily age the bourbon in one of those barrels, or put it in there initially, which I'd probably be too strong, but anyway, the flavor is very much like a gingerbread cookie with cinnamon. It adds a really strong flavor. And as a matter of fact, they use that barrel in Brazil to make a specific kind of drink that they drink down there. I don't remember the name of it, but the wood can have a big effect on it if you change it from the original oak.
So speaking of wood, a few years back, I don't know how long this product has been around, but I think is it Jim Beam Devil's Cut? Is it Jim Beam Devil's Cut?
Yes.
And from what I understand, in the commercial showed like wringing out a piece of wood like a sponge to get the last strips out of there. Is that actually a something that helps flavor, that brings out a beneficial flavor, or was that just a genius marketing move to like?
I think it's more of a marketing move. You know how they get it. I mean, there's when you take the fluid out of the barrel, there's probably still some trapped in the wood, and how they get it out, I don't know. But it shouldn't be any different than what was in the barrel. It's just temporarily in the wood. It wasn't like it spent the whole time in there, because it moves back and forth. If it didn't, the whole barrel wouldn't get aged the way that it does. The typical barrels are 53 gallons. That's a standard. But you see people age them in small barrels. These little small barrels that you can buy, people will then take products like this and put them in the barrel for some short period of time. Put it in there too long, you're gonna get a lot of oak, because of the surface area difference, it's gonna age a lot faster in here. So 1 month is about equal to 1 year. So if you, so some distilleries cheat by, I guess I should say that. They produce an alternate product by putting it in a small barrel and then not aging it as long. You do get color and flavor, but again, that process takes time. And when you take it out too quickly, some of those, especially the wood tannins and things, don't get sort of aged out, and it can be kind of harsh, a real harsh flavor. So there's tons of people who have tried to figure out how to short circuit this process, right? Because when you put it in a barrel, it's got to be in there for at least 4 years. You're not making any money for those 4 years.
Right.
And so a lot of these guys, when they start out, the new distilleries, they'll make vodka, they'll make rum, they'll make other products that they can sell right away while they're waiting for it, or they'll go buy barrels from somebody else. There are contract distillers out there who will make barrels for other people. And the biggest one is MGP, which is in Indiana, and it used to be Seagram's distillery. It's a huge distillery, been there since the 1940s, and they produce for a lot of people. And those products end up in all different companies' names. When you look at the back of the bottle, it'll say distilled by. If it doesn't say distilled by, if it says something other than that, then it wasn't distilled by them. It was a source product. Some people don't like source products. I guess I depended on the source. if MGP sourced it, at least they know what they're doing, right?
Right.
Now, what they did with it after they got it, that'll be, depending on how they aged it or whatever. But MGP now has its own brand names, and so they're selling their own brands, mostly under Lux Rose name. So, there's a lot of commercial things involved in trying to get a distillery started, and that aging thing. If you can short circuit that somehow, yeah, you'd be happy to do that. Unfortunately, it rarely produces a product that's as good.
Right. So I imagine somebody getting into the bourbon distilling business, it wouldn't, like you said, it's not very cost effective. It's not very lucrative. You can't keep the lights on if you're sitting there waiting 4 years.
Yeah.
Let's say you waited 4 years. You had 4 years of investment in this product, and then nobody likes it, or it's bad and you don't sell it, and you just waited 4 years. You poured all this money.
Well, they would know before then, because they sample these barrels during the whole time that they're aging. So if they, how public opinion would be, I don't know, but you're going to know what was in there and whether it was something that people would want to buy and drink, because you're not going to wait till the whole 4 years before you taste it. They taste it actually when it comes out like this. They taste it at various stages, and you'll go through the rick house. Sometimes they actually pull the barrel down and they use something called a barrel thief. They put it in there and they draw some out. But another way most of them do it now is they just go through with a cordless drill and drill a hole in the barrel, get some out, and then they put a plug in it.
What about the sawdust of the drill? I guess it would just kind of settle.
It's still oak. I mean, yeah, it's gonna get filtered out, because all the char that's in there also breaks off, and so when you pull the liquid out, there's a bunch of char in there, and they have to filter some of that stuff out. Now you'll see on a bottle where it says not chill filtered. That's a big thing nowadays. And what they mean by that is some of the fatty acids that are in bourbon, when they get cold, they congeal. And so in the past, to prevent that from happening, they would filter those out, and they would get it cold and then filter out that thicker, some of those things. People nowadays, like I say, the purists don't want that to happen. They want all the flavor to be in there, everything to stay in there.
Right.
And so they'll say non-chill filtered. And a lot of them, other companies don't actually do that anyway, but some do. And the reason they did that was because when you put it on the shelf, if it got cold in the store, it would look cloudy. People would buy it.
Right.
So you don't want it. You want it to look nice and clear and nice amber color. No, stuff floating around in there or anything. And so they would chill filter it. But like I say, the trend now is that people don't want it chill filtered. They want it to say on the bottle, not chill filtered. And you'll see that a lot of times.
Do you think it's very common? We were speaking earlier about some people like to look for the during Prohibition bourbons or pre-Prohibition, and some are looking for the World War II versions and batches. Do you think a lot of that, do you think it is all about the taste in that scenario? Or, as I suspect, if I find a bottle of whiskey from 1865, I want that bottle of whiskey, whether it has whiskey in it or not, because of the historical significance of when it was made. Well,
there are people that are collectors for different reasons. I mean, just some people collect thimbles, so some people collect bourbon. I've been accused of being a hoarder because I have so many bottles, but mine are all to be consumed at some point, not all at once, obviously, but there are people that buy them just to keep them, and they don't intend to ever open them. And like you say, those are the people that are looking for those really unique things that they can, just collect and put on a shelf, and it'll be like a prize. They'll drink other stuff and they'll put those up for just as displays, if you will. And so people collect for different reasons, and there are plenty of bottles out there to do that with. Everybody's got an uncle that was a whiskey drinker, and nobody thought about it until they opened his cabinets after he was gone, and all these bottles in there, and some aren't even opened yet. So
heirloom bottles.
So they can be quite old. You don't find things pre-Prohibition bottles are pretty hard to find, because, well, for one thing, until Old Forester started doing it, they didn't put it in bottles. It was just in barrels. I mean, it was sold in barrels. So Old Forester is named after a doctor who was a surgeon during the Civil War, and he actually owned a pharmacy. And whiskey was sold as medicine a lot of times because this is pre antibiotics, pre vaccines, and so a lot of things were treated with alcohol, and it was not that unusual. And even during Prohibition, this bottle is actually from was bottled during Prohibition.
Wow!
And on the back of it, it says the American Medicinal Spirits Company, because unlike the pictures you see of during Prohibition of them busting up all the barrels with axes and all that.
Right.
The government didn't do that. They gathered up all those barrels and put them in warehouses, and in government warehouses, and then they sold it as medicine. And so 6 distilleries in Kentucky were allowed to stay open during Prohibition because they realized they were going to run out pretty quick if they stopped making it. And so they were able to continue to make bourbon during Prohibition. And so this one was actually produced in 1917, but it was sold in 1930.
Here's an interesting historical question that I never thought about, and it's been a while since I've been in history. I like history, but Prohibition, you could not sell alcohol at bars and whatnot in the United States. You still use it medicinally and for different things. Could Jim Beam and the others export whiskey? Could they sell it to Mexico,
No.
Canada?
Jim Beam was not one of the 6, actually.
Okay.
They had to start over again after Prohibition. No, the Volstead Act, which is the act that did away with whiskey production, alcohol production of all kinds. You could not make it, you could not transport it, and you could not sell it, but it was not illegal to drink it.
So if you already had it.
So if you were caught in one of the speakeasies, you were just drinking and you were okay. It was the people selling it that were in trouble. And so there were some weird rules there, but anyway, no, you could not export. They didn't make enough.
Right.
They weren't making enough. Some of the distilleries actually moved. Like one of the ones that was actually run by a woman, one of the few, moved to Mexico, and a lot of their product ended back in the United States.
Yeah.
So Canada was a big supplier. A lot of it came across from Canada, and some from Mexico, and some even from Europe. But it was an interesting time if you were a whiskey drinker.
I want to move on to the nuts and bolts of how do you taste whiskey? How are you supposed to drink bourbon?
Right. When you do a tasting, a lot of people, you don't just slam it back, okay?
No.
Because there's alcohol in there, and alcohol is going to, for just about anybody, is going to burn a little bit, when you first start drinking it. So the best way to do it is to take a small sip and just swish it around in your mouth. In Kentucky, they call that a Kentucky chew. But basically, you're just swishing that around to acclimate your mouth to the alcohol. It may be a little hot at first, burn a little bit, but what that does is then the next sip will be smoother, and the one after that will be even better. So if you do that sort of pre-treatment of your mouth for the alcohol, it really makes a big difference. Before you even taste it, though, you should smell it, and it's real important to not just take a big whiff.
Right.
It's important to keep your mouth open and breathe out through your mouth, because that allows the alcohol vapors to kind of circulate through. Right. And if you just breathe it into your nose, it can burn, or you won't get the full sensory feel that you need to get for the tasting. And try both sides of your nose. This is kind of weird, but you smell differently. And as a matter of fact, I smell absolutely no bourbon on the left side of my nose. It's all on the right. If I try the left side, I get nothing. So everybody's a little bit different. Not sure why that is, but I would try both sides. But anyway, that's real important. If you preset it for that, and then, like I say, take small sips, swirl them around, taste them, get the sensory experience of tasting the bourbon, because all of those flavors in there, are not going to come out all at once. Matter of fact, you may not get some of them until the next sip. The people that talk about it in professional judging contests or whatever and all that. They talk about the beginning and the middle and the finish. And the beginning can be kind of harsh if, like I say, if you're just first sipping on alcohol. The middle is where you get a lot of the flavors come out, and then the finish you'll get some different flavors a lot of times as it's kind of working its way through. And some of those can be a lot different. You might pick up something that you didn't pick up at all in the first part of it. So just think about it. I have a sensory kit when I'm tasting something sort of officially, where I have all these different scents, and I actually smell those as I'm tasting to try to link the smell to the flavor.
Right.
And they don't have to do that for a tasting, of course. Just find out what you like. The other thing is there's all different products out there, and they all taste a little bit different. I mean, different ones. The yeast that's used has a big impact on it. You can get different flavors.
For sure.
So it's important to do it slowly. I think a lot of people, if you just start drinking it too fast, you won't like it. I made a list of the stages in bourbon drinker. The first part is it tastes like gasoline. Because
that's pretty much where I'm at.
Yeah,
at
when
the
you first sip it, if you're not really doing it in a way that allows you to acclimate, then you just get a burn, and a lot of people stop there. That's the end of it. Start with the lower proofs. Start with things that are that you can that'll work, and then work your way up. I mean, you're not going to want to start with. I've got a bottle of Old Taylor that's 139 proof. You don't want to start with that one. That's really the only things you need to think about. Is you may get a little bit of burn. Some bourbons, because of what's in them, will burn more than others. But you might get a little bit of a burn in your chest when you swallow it down the first time when it's first getting started. And they call that a Kentucky hug in Kentucky. They got names for all these things.
I love all these little names.
They got all the names for everything.
Colloquialisms.
Yeah. And so you'll get a little bit of a warm feel there if sometimes. So, but yeah, just going through and then if you want to, bourbon will change if you've had water to it. And so some people put a little bit of water in, taste it again. Most tastings do that. I'm not a big water fan, but some people put drops of water in just to taste it, and they say it opens up the bourbon, it just changes the flavor. It's diluting it, so it's going to change the flavor. So there's a lot of processes you can go, the steps that kind of make it more agreeable, and that's what I'm after. I'm after making people be able to taste it and taste the bourbon and enjoy the process.
Right. No, see, that's where I'm at. I've got a neighbor who is a bourbon aficionado, and he's been training me over the years of just how to drink, how to sit in his backyard. He's got a paradise of a backyard. Sit in his backyard and just sip on some bourbon. So my question especially for a first-time taster, should they taste their bourbon, especially first time, on the rocks or neat?
All of the ones that I put out to be tasted will be neat, but they will be very small samples.
What does neat mean?
That just means no ice, no water, just out of the bottle, the way it is out in the bottle.
Just straight out of the bottle.
So yeah, just don't add anything. I think if they do it correctly, even if it's a first-time person, they're going to get some flavor out of it. They're not going to be as put off. I think people just get, like I say, they just take a big swig and it's like burns, and all they get is the burn.
Honestly, I think I can speak for personal experience, and I know I'm not alone on this. My aversion to bourbon and whiskey is because I associated it with being younger and doing a shot at like Jack Daniels, and then just being on my knees on the floor, just one shot.
Yeah.
This is not after a long night. This is the first shot where I'm just reacting to the harshness of it all.
Yeah. It's not a good way to drink it.
No.
I mean, you see like the cowboy movies where they drink, they shut it back. That's because it tasted so bad. The stuff they were drinking was awful, and so that was just to get it out of their taste, away from their taste buds. That's not the way to drink it. It's made slowly, and you should drink it that way, because there really are a lot of pretty complicated flavors in there, and if you give your mouth a chance, and you're not afraid, it'll get better.
I will attest to that you do not need to be afraid of having a bourbon or a whiskey tasting when you do it correctly, as Randy was saying. You start getting your palate used to what it's about to consume. You start kind of, I equated it to dipping your toe in the water and then your heel and ankle and knee. So you get acclimated to what you are about to be consuming. And when you do that, I know from my just personal experience with my neighbor educating me on bourbon, that it is so much more approachable to do it that way. And in fact, very quickly, I was able, as someone who was averted to bourbon, within a few minutes, I became enlightened to, oh, this is how you drink it. This is approachable. And now I've been able to kind of, when I go to his house, I liked that. Give me another thing of that. I learned, even in my newness of bourbon tasting, now kind of what I like. And what I like tends to be, I think, a little bit just slightly sweet, not like cinnamon, fireball, anything like that, but just a slightly, I like a smoother whiskey. Yeah. And I think that's what people don't realize is not, absolutely by no means, not all bourbon and whiskey is this, you're not drinking gasoline. Absolutely not. Yeah. There are very unique and very tasty, very pleasant flavor profiles to bourbon, even when you're new. I can't guarantee, but I think most people coming to it with an open mind and some open taste buds would realize, oh, I know what to enjoy. I find out what I enjoy, and I can actually now sit and be sophisticated in a nice big high back leather chair with my paper and my pipe and everything, and I can appreciate a good bourbon. I'm still working up to Scotch. I can't wrap my mind around Scotch yet. Yeah. But
well, Scotch is a whole different thing. It tends to be milder. I mean, most Scotches are 80 proof. They don't go a lot higher than that. It's a different flavor, and there's a million different. Well, not a million, I shouldn't say. There's a lot of different flavors of Scotch because of the way they what they do to the barley. Cooking it or drying it over the peat fires and all that, they can add a lot of that flavor. So you get some that taste like, to me, they taste like beef jerky, and some that are just really, really mild. And I'm used to drinking bourbon, which has that, like I said, that corn sweetness and the rye and things are going to just jump out at you more than Scotches tend to be more subtle. And maybe if I'd started drinking Scotch when I was younger, I would get more of the nuances of it. But I think people, bourbon's not for everybody, clearly. And some people really just won't like it. I mean, it's just, it's like, I'm not a tequila fan, but that doesn't mean tequila's bad. It just means it's not for me. So, but it's nice when you can come and try it.
Right.
In a setting where we are going to talk about a lot of things. We're going to talk about the history, we're going to talk about the geology, the chemistry a little bit, to give you a feel for how it gets to be the way it is.
Right.
And then you can think, oh, well, when you go to look at it at the store, you say, well, I like a little bit milder. I like that sweeter flavor. I should pick up Maker's Mark or one of the wheat bourbons, Weller or something like that, rather than going for Bullet, which is a real high rye bourbon and real popular in bars because it comes through. You can mix it with stuff and you still get the bourbon flavor through. Whereas you put Maker's Mark in some of those drinks, you won't taste it at all. And so I think there's probably a bourbon for everybody if you like bourbon, and it may be that you just don't like it. But,
it could be.
But it's a good way to try it. We give it a nice setting for you to try it in, and some instruction on how to do it, and we talk about how the different flavors are developed, and we have samples that tie into the grains, the wood, the aging, and also the yeast to tell how these bourbons taste differently because this difference.
So referring to, this will be the last question, I promise. It's such a fascinating subject on all levels, historically, geologically, biologically, like everything, sciencely, it's very interesting. So someone's coming, especially to a first-time tasting, or someone has just been drinking bourbon here and there, and they don't really know what they like. They just drink it. It's in a drink. It's mixed rum and not rum and coke, but like Jack and Coke or something like that. Somebody who's really trying to, all right, I'm trying to figure out exactly what I like or where I sit on the profile. Are you going to start that person in the middle, or on the extreme, like a harsh end, or would you start at the smoothest end and then kind of work your way around from there?
I think I would, if somebody had never had it before and they wanted to just try some, I usually start with lower proofs, nothing higher than 90. And then I'll pull out a wheat bourbon, a rye bourbon, and maybe a higher rye bourbon. And those three cover most of the flavor profiles that you're going to see. So if you maybe say, I like rye bread. I like that flavor. I like that peppery, flavor that you get from the rye. They may say, I really like this. They like pepper on their mashed potatoes. I don't, but they might. So say, okay, you're going to be more of a rye person. Or maybe I like the wheat bread and I don't care for the spicy part. And you're going to go more toward the wheat. I would do a cross section of grains to start with.
Okay.
But keep the proof low, because that turns people off faster than anything. You can work your way up the proof ladder when you have, as you develop your expertise in drinking it and tasting it.
Right.
But really, first, just kind of decide where you are in the profile of the product that's being put out.
I think a fun way to think about it would be, do you remember those Choose Your Own Adventure books? Where if you think Timmy should go on the door, turn to page 222. If you think Timmy should walk away and go tell his mom, go back to page 13. So it's kind of like one of those where you mentioned, well, do you like rye bread or do you like wheat bread? It's kind of, okay, if you like wheat bread, turn to page 22 of the bourbons. If you like rye, turn it. So it's kind of this meandering stepping stones across the stream of getting to the other side of appreciating bourbon. There's different paths you can take, but there is a method to how to get. I think
there's a million of them out there. And one of the things I talk about is the label.
Right.
We talk a lot about the label, what's on the label, what's on the back of the bottle, what clues does that give you as to, first of all, who produced it and all that, but also what's in it, what kind of things you're going to like, might like or not like about it.
Right.
And so when you go in a store, because there's, nowadays when bourbon's so popular, there's a whole rack of, bourbons from one end to the other, and you can just walk in there and just stare at it. You have no idea. Right. You can ask the people in the store. Sometimes they'll give you a good answer. Sometimes they'll steer you toward their products,
right?
Which is not to be unexpected. But still, there's lots of products out there, and being able to pick one, even if you're just by yourself, just looking through the labels and saying, I think this is something for me. There's a lot of information in some of the labels. Some of it's made up, but the story about how it got to be the way it is, the history sometimes is just made up. But there are required things on the bottle they cannot get rid of. Things like Colonel H. Taylor. He was a real person, and he actually had a lot to do with modernizing the making of bourbon. And he was a big push behind the Bottle and Bond Act. Bottle and Bond's another layer of rules. And that started in 1897 when people could just put anything in a bottle. Right. And so he wanted to make it more regulated. And it was the first Consumer Protection Act in the United States was for bourbon.
Wow.
And it protected people to know if it's gone through these steps, I know what's in that bottle. It's not just something somebody made up and called bourbon. So he was real important. But somebody told me one time that I didn't know much about bourbon because I didn't call him Colonel. I just called him H. Taylor. And the reason that I didn't do that is because he was not in the military. Colonel is a title that the governor of Kentucky gives to people who of note. And so you may have heard of another famous Colonel Sanders.
I was just thinking,
Harlan Sanders was not a colonel. He was actually in the military, but he never got past private. So saying that you didn't put colonel on it, I don't give that title to him really because it's not really an official title. It's just some part of their name really. But a lot of those guys were colonels. We never had any majors or generals. We just had colonels. So
we've covered a lot of ground here today. There is still so much more to learn about bourbon and whiskey, and more importantly, I think, finding out what you like. You can certainly come and not do any tasting and just learn about the history and the chemistry of a very fascinating I was going to say of American history, but I mean the art of distilling alcohol is a global story, and this is part of that story here. So, Randy, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the HMNS Beyond Bones podcast presented by the Houston Museum of Natural Science. I've been your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger, reminding you to come out and visit us. And of course, stay safe and stay curious.